I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. Here I am with Ian Burns, our managing editor, and our really big show. We got lots today, lots to talk about. Kicking it off with Danielle Smith. She says she won't support the federal government's plan to deal with Trump tariffs, getting a lot of flack for that.
Yep, and she was spoken of rather negatively, I think it's fair to say, during the closing press conference by Doug Ford and Trudeau as well. I mean, Ford made quite a poignant point because Ford has been very much like Canada first. He keeps using that term, Canada first, like province second.
Yeah.
Um, but he said the only industry that's been explicitly threatened by Donald Trump is the auto industry, which obviously is basically all in Ontario. And he said he's still willing to consider using that as a sort of retaliatory measure against the Americans. And he says it's not fair because the auto industry is the equivalent of Alberta's oil. That's what he claimed. I mean, that's not quite true, I don't think, if you look at the percentage of the GDP. But yeah, so he put pressure on her to sort of make sacrifices, but obviously she said there's just no way. There's no way she's going to sacrifice oil and gas.
Yeah. In her defense, the federal government has worked very hard at kind of depressing the natural resource, especially the oil and gas sector and LNG sector. And I can see why all of a sudden they now have that chip to play because it clearly is like our biggest asset in Canada. It's our oil and gas LNG sector. Like we're one of the top oil reserve countries in the world. And all of a sudden, it becomes important for the federal government when like they've had ministers like Stephen Gibault trying to like really get involved in Alberta's natural resources.
Well, with the emissions cap, obviously that sort of there's been this long running war, basically, hasn't there, between the
Mhm.
Liberals and just the province of Alberta, some would say. But
Yeah.
it really was ignited, I think, recently with the emissions cap because, I mean, that sparked a lot of talk of separation just
Yeah,
in the last
they've
few
had a
months.
long running feud, the federal government and the provincial government of Alberta, in because it's their policies are anti-oil, and then like the Albertans, obviously that's their biggest asset, and they're going to want to promote it as much as they can.
Yeah, and obviously they brought up the refusal to back the pipelines, particularly the one that would have gone to the St. Lawrence, that would have gone to sort of Quebec,
Yeah,
which,
yeah.
I mean, in many ways, this isn't so much a Canada-Alberta battle, really. It's more of a Quebec-Alberta battle. That's how I sort of see it. And also BC, to a lesser extent, is another obstacle because these two provinces, Quebec and BC, are the gateway to the world. They are the kind of entry and exit into Canada, aren't they, for all intents and purposes? And they're both pretty hostile to Alberta's resources industry. So,
Well,
and they're also very important in politics, particularly Quebec.
the good part of all this is they finally realized that Alberta holds a big card and that it should be recognized for that. And I think supporting Canada would be in the best interests of Alberta as well. But like there has to be some give and take on that.
Yeah, I think I can see why they would be disappointed, though. The premiers and the representatives of the federal government that were there in Ottawa yesterday, because they've tried so hard. I mean, they've even got a little hat now
Hmm.
that Canada's not for sale. Like they're doing their absolute best to put up a kind of a unified wall in the face of these threats by Trump. And then, Daniel Smith has basically said there is no such thing. Like we're not in that wall. So immediately Trump will be grinning like a coyote, won't he, at the prospect of getting in there and dividing Canada.
Yeah, we have the hack here. A few Americans support Trump's threat of the 25% tariff, says a poll. Um, Daniel Smith and Doug Ford, definitely the bigger voices in there. And there is a vacuum of leadership right now with the federal government because, he's an outgoing prime minister that says he won't even run in the next election. So we're waiting for an election. We're waiting for a new liberal leader. And then I think in that vacuum, obviously Ontario And Alberta and Quebec are the leaders in some of the stuff that we have for, and I guess British Columbia you could put in there too, in some of the stuff that we're exporting to the United States.
Well, I would say the one that's often forgotten is actually the most important. In the long run, more important than Alberta, and that's Saskatchewan.
Right.
And it was very interesting that Scott Moe, the Premier of Saskatchewan, he went to Ottawa, he was there, and he was actually, he was reasonably kind and complimentary of Justin Trudeau and the federal government. Very unusual for him
Mm.
to speak like that. But he is obviously he's very, very well aware of the stakes, I think, Scott Moe, he sort of he backed Canada, as it were, and that's a big coup, I think, because you know, obviously we export all this oil, or Alberta really exports these 4 million barrels of oil a day or whatever into the US, but the US is the largest producer of oil in the world, and they've also got huge reserves that they haven't tapped yet. So theoretically, they could kind of, with a lot of pain to themselves, they could expand their oil industry to make up for those 4 million barrels, but they can't replace what Saskatchewan gives them, the
Yeah, I think
uranium and
Daniel
the
is
and the potash.
definitely walking a tightrope because I think most Canadians would want to see the country stick together, and I think an election would help that in regards to having a clear mandate and a clear leader in guiding that, because it should be the federal government at the table making decisions. It shouldn't be up to the Doug Fords and the Daniel Smiths or the Scott Moes. And then it seems to be the absent David Eby in this discussion, and that's the next thing we're going to talk about. The BC Forest Minister says Trump tariffs could be devastating to the sector. And we've interviewed Kevin Falcon, John Rustad, even David Eby, and the previous forest minister. And then our forest sector is according to many of them, in shambles, or it's in a really rough position. And this definitely would not help our forestry sector in British Columbia.
No, I mean that's another. That is something else that Trump has actually mentioned explicitly, where he said, we've got our own trees or something along those lines, and then said we'll cut them down and then we'll plant even better ones to replace them, in this sort of classically stupid way of
Yeah.
speaking. But
This softwood lumber problem has been around since Jean Chrétien. It's it's been it's been an issue with Canada and the U.S. for a long, long time, and I think Jean Chrétien, when he was here at Level Up, said that he threatened to cut off, like the supply for baseball bats. He said because Canada produces the hardwoods for the baseball bats. Um, that's what he talked tough
yeah,
about, and but that fight for softwood lumber has been around forever.
yeah, during the Harper time as well. I
Yeah.
mean, it is a kind of, because it's like Trump says, as is often the case. Trump sort of presents a weird, distorted version of the truth in almost everything that he says. And it's true that America, obviously, the US obviously has enormous forests that it could be using instead of BC, but it's just not quite how it works. They source them from Canada, like Quebec and BC, primarily because that's just more efficient. That's just easier, and it's sort of better for the economy. So there's kind of truth to it. But I mean, I was reading, obviously housing would be affected, like they use the wood to build houses, but also apparently like a huge majority of the newspapers that are printed in the US use Canadian, ultimately Canadian wood, Canadian sort of
Yeah.
paper. So that's quite interesting. Like people have speculated that maybe, given that Trump absolutely despises the legacy media and they're the only ones that print newspapers anymore, that it's actually it's a way for him to slap them as well and get sort of two
Um,
birds with one stone.
our pulp industry definitely, like prints newsprint, but it also prints all the other types of paper too, like in prints paper, even paper towel. Like, there's a ton of uses for the pulp and the paper that comes out of there's some big paper pulp producers here in Canada. So, Walmart said the underweight meat problem has been fixed by a BC supplier. This has been a story that's been in the headlines quite a bit. They were actually utilizing the plastic in the wrapper and the foam and all that in the weight thing, and people were getting underweight meat, but they're paying for the meat, but they're paying for the package as well.
Well, I don't think that's going to help them in this lawsuit, is it? Because they've basically admitted that it's true, that it was
But,
happening.
you think somebody would have like twigged on that earlier?
Yeah, I mean, and what are they going to do? Are they going to for an equal period of time? Are they going to sell it sort of more like cheaper to make up for it for all these years of selling it overpriced.
There's been a lot of arguments out there that Canada's grocery business only has a couple large retailers, whereas in the US they have lots of different competition, and competition drives prices lower, and that's one of our issues. And if you can harken back to when Trudeau's government said that, oh, we need to force the retailers to come together and have like price fixing, I'm just like, what? Why would we want them to do price fixing? Where they, like freeze the prices?
Yeah, Kamala Harris suggested that as well, didn't she? One of the sort of gaffes in her campaign when she suggested fixing prices on certain foods in
That
America.
never turns out well for the consumer.
No, it doesn't, and we've have so many examples of that being true, don't we? But I mean, it's politically it kind of works to an extent anyway. I mean,
Mhm.
Jagmeet Singh has been banging that drum for years now, hasn't he? And he seems to still hang around at about 20% in the polls. But I think, the main reason that Canada, or one of the main reasons that Canada sort of suffers with groceries is what we've spoken about before, which is just how low grade the transport infrastructure is. And the fact that everything has to be driven basically by a truck across huge swathes of land, or,
Yeah.
like,
And then you add the carbon tax onto that and then we can talk about that in a bit, and it'll come up here. Dan Elvis put out a tweet there, and this is all going when Carney's gonna, I think he's gonna announce today, isn't it? Today he's gonna announce his
this
bid.
afternoon, apparently. Yeah.
Yeah. And presenting himself as a outsider when, like, they're bringing out all these photos and different things where, and Chrystia Freeland's comments that he's clearly one of the biggest insiders according to them.
Yeah, well, I mean, a picture of him shaking hands with Trudeau isn't really the kind of like ultimate exhibit in the case to
Yeah.
determine whether or not he's an insider. I don't think the evidence that should be put forward is the most obvious thing in the world. Just Google Mark Carney and look at his like Wikipedia page. He was the Bank of Canada governor. He was the Bank of England governor. He currently, I think, still works for the UN in some capacity. He's an advisor to Justin Trudeau on economics. He's worked for every big bank you can think of, pretty much. Like, I think Goldman Sachs and all the big boys. He is undoubtedly a member of not just the Canadian elite, but the world elite. He's a sort of financial guru to a lot of people, economic guru. Like, he's absolutely embedded in the system, and he has been for what, 20 years, something like that? At least 20 years, I would say.
Yeah, you sound like you're underwater a little bit there. So I don't know if you can position your mic a little bit, but we've got a video to show you here. This is a person on Carla Joy Treadway, and she's got some comments there for the Liberal government. We're going to play that clip while you try to fix your audio.
If you haven't checked your bank account today, you should.
Why? Did you freeze it? Did you devalue the currency again? Did you turn my money into monopoly money? Did you take some of it and use it for some crazy DEI social justice policy that doesn't make any sense? Are you garnishing it for climate change? Don't touch my bank account. Don't look at it. I don't want you to have anything to do with it. Don't attach it to a social credit system or some weird digital currency. Just stop. Every time you do something, things get worse. Stop doing things. Every time you do anything, everything gets worse, especially when it comes to money.
If you haven't checked your bank.
Yeah, so that was Justin Trudeau promoting that the carbon tax was in the mail, and then this is one of the many, many responses out there on social media in regards to check your mail or check your bank account because there's a carbon tax deposit.
I don't know why he keeps making those videos, because they never really seem to go down well.
No.
But
And
I
then,
mean, I don't like what she did there either. It was a very sort of shrill and hectoring video, but I mean, it makes a few good points.
I think they're kind of like awkward. Like his video was awkward and her video was awkward as well. So
yeah, it's the cringe social media complex.
there you go. But it is, there's a ton of it out there, and I just picked this one here as an example of what's out there, right? So Mark Carney to announce his leadership candidacy here in Edmonton. And there seems to be three that we know of right now: Chrystia Freeland, Karina Gold, and Mark Carney. Any others that you? Oh, there was that other person too, right? The long shot there.
Well, there's a few. Yeah, there's a former MP. I think his name is Luke Bayless or something like that.
Mm,
There's First Nations geezer put his name forward. But I mean, these are people that probably realistically aren't going to raise the cash
yeah.
to actually get to actually officially become candidates. But they've put their um put their hats in the ring. Obviously, that guy as well who doesn't speak French and doesn't think that matters. Who's been panned for saying that?
Uh, and then this is when you put up the Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation has penned a cease and desist letter to Alberta's premier over the proposed AI data center that Kevin O'Leary's been promoting there. He said they haven't been consulted at all at this point, so they need to be brought to the table according to them.
Well, if this is actually viable, if this is the real deal, as a lot of people seem to think it is, then it would be absolutely heartbreaking, wouldn't it? Almost like unforgivable to not go ahead with it. Like a $70 billion investment in Canada is huge, isn't it?
It is.
Especially in the northern part of a province. You
Yeah.
know, often you feel like they're kind of passed over with investments.
And one of the strengths about the northern part of the province or the country is that there's a bunch of cheap energy there, LNG, and there's also the cold weather, right? One of the things that AI data centers need is a ton of energy, and they need cooling because these computers generate a lot of heat. So there could be some natural cooling that's available in the north there. So, I mean, we definitely need, because if you look at the map of Canada, most of our population lives on that slim piece along the border. Getting more investment other than just mines and stuff like that into the north would be amazing.
Yeah, but it's like a horizontal version of Chile almost, isn't it, Canada, when you look at it from
Yeah,
a population density point of view.
yeah, much
But I mean, they
vulnerable.
do that in Finland as well, don't they? Like they take advantage of the cooler
Yeah,
weather
Bitcoin miners
to
are out there for sure. In
yeah.
those Norwegian or sorry, the Scandinavian countries.
Yeah, it's a smart way to act, and it would be very smart of
Taking
Canada to
advantage of
do that.
some of our natural environment makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Well, this is the thing, though, isn't it? Technology is so transformative that it can change how you look at land. Like, for example, who throughout any period of history would have looked at the Sahara Desert and thought, I'm really glad I own that. I'm glad
Yeah,
that's my territory." That's like been almost like an enemy of human beings for throughout our entire history. But
yeah.
now with solar panels and how easy it is to generate energy from the sun, a lot of people look at that and say like they're jealous, they're envious that like Algeria, for example, could now theoretically sell energy to Europe from it using the desert. So and that we have to be optimistic and say maybe that could be sort of Canada's version of that, and we could use the technology that's available and make money out of something that throughout history most people have thought of as not being particularly valuable.
It takes a person with vision. Absolutely takes a person with vision. And I would give an example where I was just at Las Vegas was nothing but a desert. And it doesn't necessarily all have to be, but if you look at Las Vegas right now, I mean, it's a mecca in a desert. And it also has, like you say, like, the ability to generate a lot of energy from solar.
Yeah. And technology has gone really quickly, has developed really quickly. Just even in this century, I think it's been so rapid that we still have a lot of like old-fashioned perspectives, don't we? We have like 20th century ideas of what's possible and what we can do. But with the technology that we have now, yeah, I mean, we could the sort of what we think of as Canada and the Canadian economy, that could really dramatically change if we actually just use those technologies to our advantage.
Yeah, if you lay out a timeline, and I've done this a few times because we do a lot of stuff work with AI. If you lay out a timeline from the invention of fire, the invention of the wheel, and then going fast forward to like the radio, the television, the locomotive, steam, and then just electricity and different things. And what we have is a rapidly accelerating timeline, like for technology. Innovation is accelerating at an accelerating pace. And that is like the compression that we're in right now. You're seeing advancements that used to take decades to happen or are happening in weeks and months.
Yeah, well, a lot of people refer to it as like the third industrial revolution
It is.
after the sort of machine revolution and then the original industrial revolution back in
And
the sort of 18th century.
you can deny it all you want, but AI, artificial intelligence, is likely more important to the world right now than electricity was, the impact of electricity when it first was rolled out.
Yeah, but speaking of electricity, we need a hell of a lot more of that, don't we, to fuel this revolution. So,
Yeah.
and you know, David Eby just the other day, very well aware of that as he speaks more about expanding the grid.
Yeah. Uh, Kristen Friedland coming out and saying this is, I think, the first statement I've seen for her. Like, I mean, I haven't seen a lot. A lot of the press is definitely geared towards Mark Carney. It seems like the media is really pushing Mark Carney, whereas Chrystia Freeland isn't getting a lot of press time. But here's one of her big statements. She says she's going to scrap the carbon tax because it's evident that the public doesn't want it, and she's going to come out with a new and improved thing. Sounds like a new type of laundry detergent, new and improved solution for the carbon tax. And that was similar to what, remember when we interviewed Sonia Furstenau from the Green Party and saying that the consumers are definitely not, or the average citizen is not pleased with paying this carbon tax, both at the pump and on their gas bills and bills at their homes. And it's a compounding tax. So one of the things that she's saying, which is odd because their party for the last 9 years really promoted the carbon tax. And she was, don't forget, the deputy prime minister and the finance minister.
Well, and on a number of occasions, she defended the policy. I mean, it would be impossible to count them all probably because she did it so many times and she was forced to do it so many times by, circumstances. But yeah, I mean, she said it. Another thing she said was it's revenue neutral. She defended it on those grounds and said all the money we get, we give back, so it doesn't
Uh,
cost anything, which
the,
is an extraordinarily naive
yeah,
view of that policy, I would say.
just the common sense that the beast of the growing public sector has been eating a lot of it, no matter how you slice it, right? Like, because they cost money to administer it, and the
Yeah, I
beast
was going to
is
say, like,
eating a lot of it.
unless she's suggesting, unless she knows something that we don't, which is that all those public servants do that for free, that
Mm.
they just administer the carbon tax pro bono, just out of sheer patriotism.
And talking about cringe, here's Chris Freeland's social media post. He's getting out there more. This reminds me of a flat lay that some young girls used to do on the internet where they put out their clothing. This is one where she's got the 3 cups of coffee and the 4 cell phones. just like, okay.
Another thing that I find a bit cringe is this, like, like we know that she's going to announce that she wants to be the leader of the Liberal Party. She knows that we know that she wants to be the leader of the Liberal Party, and yet it still hasn't been announced. And this tweet again is like an obvious. The only possible context that could help anybody understand this tweet is, oh yeah, of course, because she wants to be the leader of the Liberal Party. But she still hasn't even said that.
Yeah.
It's just this completely bizarre world where we all know something, but it's not official. Like, we don't really know.
Well, the flat lay here with the 4 cell phones and the 3 cups of coffee, it's not a natural. And with the pen in her hand, you know what I mean? It's not a natural thing. It looks like it's obviously a staged photo. And that's one of the things that I guess a lot of politicians are guilty of, these staged photos, right? And these staged photo ops. And Trudeau is definitely famous for all his photo ops, because even when we were invited, lots of times we weren't, to his press conference here in the Kelowna area, we were told we were not allowed to ask questions, but we could take photos.
Well, that sums up the entire Trudeau brand, really, isn't it? Like, looks good, maybe it doesn't sound good. think good, if you want to phrase it that way.
And it's sad that as a media organization, even us, that we kind of like, kowtowed to that, and we showed up and took our photo, and they told us if we dared ask a question that we wouldn't be invited back, and it turns out we weren't invited back. We had to fight our way into the last one that he was here for. And it's just kind of like a different way of they had always talked about how they support independent media, and it didn't show in their actions for sure.
Well, or any of their actions. They don't support independent media. I mean, there's no point in saying anything but that. That's the truth, sadly. And anybody that chooses to investigate that, I think will find that that's true. I'd also say, you said she was drinking coffee, but she's actually drinking tea, she says, which makes me So, which reminds me, let's say, of just how many of the prominent liberals have a history in England. She went to, I think it was Oxford University. She also worked at the Financial Times in London. Mark Carney also, I believe, went to Oxford or some university in England, and then obviously is a British citizen now because he was the governor of the Bank of England. It's there's so many links to England, and that's I just find that interesting. I mean, if it was any other country, I don't mean to sort of cast a shadow on my land of birth here, but if it was any other country, I feel like there would almost be suspicion, wouldn't there? Be like, why
Mhm.
do all these people have a history in England? Like, what did they do there?
Well, even Mark Carney, like, there's a video out there right now saying when he was asked, what country he's from, he says that he's a European. He didn't identify as a Canadian. He identified as a European.
Yeah. Well, in the context of the EU, the Brexit debate, I would imagine, yeah, like, but even that is controversial because he's picking a side there, and he was vehemently accused of having picked a side and tried to keep Britain in the EU.
On a policy announcement from the Conservatives, and this is a big one, that they would scrap the hike on the capital gains tax, which is not really been approved, but the CRA is applying it like it's approved, and he's
Yeah.
basically saying that he's going to scrap it. So I would say, like, the carbon tax, no matter what happens, unless Carney gets in, the carbon tax and the capital gains tax are probably gone.
I would say to that though, to that in response to that policy announcement from the Conservatives there, like, what took you so long?
Yeah.
Why did it take
Odd.
them so long
Yeah.
to just have any sort of position on one of the biggest policy announcements of the Liberals of the
Oh,
last year, I would say.
perhaps
Why
they
did
were
it take them
waiting.
this long?
They were waiting and allowing it to become like a fire before they said anything about it. But it doesn't make much sense to me. But um, some of the announcements from Chrystia Freeland, though, sounds like, like either she's saying she was bullied or didn't have a strong enough voice, because she's basically saying she's against the GST thing. It was a gimmick. And then she's saying she's going to scrap the carbon tax, which is something she promoted. So where did she stand all along? And was her voice not heard, or how did that work? And where she was also a big proponent of this capital gains tax. So where does she stand with that?
Yeah. Well, they often they often come out when they're pressed on that kind of thing, when they're questioned about that, they often come out and say, "Oh, it's collective responsibility." When you're in the cabinet, when you're a minister, and you have to all speak with one voice, and that's just how it works. Even though behind the scenes we make argument, like we make different points to try and get our ideas across. But all of this happened over many years, and she was finance minister for many years. So usually, if you're that dead set against the policies of your leader, you would resign, not wait until the very last second to do it. So that's what she'll be sort of pressured on.
Those are the questions that we would want to ask for sure. Joe Biden saying, he had his farewell address there. He warns of an oligarchy, of the ultra wealthy taking root in the country. And we have to remember that the Democrats spent twice as much as Trump spent in that campaign. We can play this little clip here, too.
An oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead. We see the consequences all across America, and we've seen it before. More than a century ago, but the American people stood up to the robber barons back then and busted the trusts. They didn't punish the wealthy. They just made the wealthy play by the rules everybody else had to. Workers want rights to earn their fair share. They were dealt into the deal, and it helped put us on a path to building the largest middle class, the most prosperous century any nation in the world has ever seen. We've got to do that again.
Is that a tough day? Like, there's some questions when he was talking about the Israel-Hamas deal, the ceasefire. That one of the reporters, as he was leaving, asked who should be credited with the deal, whether that should be himself or Trump, and he said, "Is that a joke?" then it came out later that even his own people said that the Trump team was actually sitting at the table in the negotiations, and at the first meeting, I think there's some Arab counterparts that said that more was done in one meeting than has been done in the past year. And the Biden team credited the Trump team with being part of the solution, because they said obviously they only have 5 days left in office, and there was no way that they were going to just take it from the Biden team. They're going to have to work in the Trump team into these negotiations, which makes common sense, right?
Yeah, I mean, he is the president, but I mean, only for a few days. So that there are degrees of power that you can have as a president, and he's now at like the lowest possible degree. Like he's as weak as a president can be, really.
It's
So
it's
obviously they had to work with Trump because he's the new man in town, isn't he?
it's a different system than ours, because in an election, like in Canada, like when you win the election, that's it, right? Like that's the new government that next day, right?
Yeah,
Whereas
that's the Westminster system. It's
Yeah.
and
Whereas
actually,
in the
mem
U.S., it's the election was November 5th, and it's like a couple months or almost 3 months, right, before the transition takes place.
Yeah, and it allows them to do all of their dirty deeds.
Mm.
Many of those dirty deeds, I would argue, contradict his little speech here, where he talks about an oligarchy that's subverting Americans' rights and all the rest of it. An oligarchy that very few serious people would disagree exists, I would say. I mean, I think it's been evident that America's been an oligarchy for quite a number of years now. It's maybe getting a bit more obvious, but it's no less true for that fact. But Biden, I would argue, is a member of that oligarchy, like a sort of lower ranked member. But he just how long ago now? Last month or something like that? Just ensured that his criminal son, who committed felonies, didn't have to be punished for it or even have it on his record, fully pardoned. His own son subverted the American legal system by abusing his power as an oligarch or a representative of the American oligarchy. And then, a few weeks later, he's on TV saying, "Oh, this oligarchy is gonna take away all our rights."
Yeah.
That nobody's going to listen to him because he's a complete hypocrite and he's lost any sort of respect that anybody had for him, or any sort of the idea that he was fighting against the system. That's all washed away many years ago. But I
Yeah.
mean, that doesn't change the fact that what he says, I think, is completely true. He hasn't said it. He hasn't said anything inaccurate, I don't think.
Well, let's go back to the Israel Hamas deal. Hopefully that sticks, and that is that was one of the promises Trump made, that he would end that war right away. He said if the hostages aren't returned by the time January 20th, that they'll be held to pay, and that's pretty obvious what he's talking about there. And then the other one is he says he's going to have a solution to the Ukraine war, so the clock's ticking on that one as well. So.
Well, Israel is also launching operations, I think, today as we speak in Gaza. So let's hope that the deal actually does
Yeah.
work out and actually sticks, because at the minute it might not even happen.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Let's move on to markets here. Again, gold. It looks like it wants a channel. It did break over that $2,700 mark. Again, it looks like it's trying to break out of its channel there. So January 20th is, I think we're going to find some direction for markets in general. And here we go with Bitcoin looking to break over that $100,000 mark. We talked about it yesterday. It looks like it wants to go over, so it needs to break over these lower highs and break out of there, and then you're going to probably see a big spring. I would imagine if it breaks out, it's going to break out pretty strong after January 20th. Everybody's waiting for that to happen. And then the Canadian dollar, again, looks like it's basing here. So it's looking for direction as well, right? Because that was a pretty big drop we've seen in the Canadian dollar over the past year. It looks like it's trying to form a base here, and hopefully it does. And hopefully that base is the springboard to higher. I think it all depends on getting an election and a clear mandate. No matter who wins, what the country needs is a leader and a clear mandate. It needs that. And I think Canadians need to have that voice in that. In our AI segment, ChatGPT, big development here, huge development. It can now do tasks. I don't know if you've used it yet, Ian, but you can now do, like, you can say to it, every morning at 8 o'clock, give me the weather for your area. Give me the top 5 stories in AI. Give me the top 5 stories in whatever you want. You can ask it to do. And then we're going to play this little video here. And if you can get me off the screen, that'd be great too.
I saw a post from the chief product.
Looks like we're not going to play it, but
AI, so I'm going to run through some of the
anyway,
examples that he.
You can, yeah. Is it going to work? No, that's fine. Yeah. So have you tried that, Ian?
No, I haven't tried it. So then it gives you a notification then with listing all of these things.
And it'll send you an email. Like I used it this morning. So I said, give me the top 5 AI stories in the world, top 5 EV stories in the world, the top 5 stories in the world, the weather for Kelowna, and the top 5 stories for Kelowna. And it did that, and you set the time, and it does it as a recurring event. And it's, like, this is their first step in text to action. And you're going to see it's going to become your personal assistant, and it likely will start booking appointments for you and stuff like that too. So pretty interesting, right? So they're just rolling it out as beta. Big improvements also in Grok the last couple of days in uploading of images. It now takes 4 images, similar to ChatGPT, which will analyze. So, like I said, things are happening in weeks as opposed to years, right? So ChatGPT tasks, something for to try out, and then if you're out there as a viewer, I think you have to have the paid version for it to work, and try it out, and then see if you have any good, like, uses for it. Share them with us, and then we'll try and talk about them too. But very, very interesting, right? Saves me a lot of time because like right now, I'm going and looking for those stories. I'm looking for the AI stories. I'm looking for the EV stories, where it can actually just come and deliver them to me.
And did it give you, when you asked for the top AI stories, did it give you, its own update there? Did it tell you about that?
No, it didn't do that.
So it's modest as well as
modest.
smart.
It didn't pump its own tires. And again, we have to remember when we hear all these people talking about how we need to slow down AI. The sad reality is that the Chinese and the Russians aren't slowing down anything. So it's kind of like Pandora's box. It's out, and the genie's out of the bottle, and we just have to push as fast. And here's a little clip I'll play for you. The new Chinese robotic company unveiled a robotic dog that can sprint a 100-meter dash in 10 seconds. Look at this thing. And I was at the CES this past week. This dog kind of style, they had several of them there. Like, a lot of people are developing these dog kind of robots because they can pack weapons, they can pack a whole bunch of things, but they can also spin and turn and jump up, and it's just amazing what these things can do. This is it just running, but it can flip over, and because even if it lands on its back, it just articulates its legs and then pushes itself back up. It's I guess the way it's set up is it can traverse uneven terrain, all kinds of different things, right?
It was Boston Dynamics, I believe, wasn't it? That created
the first dogs that we saw, the Boston Dynamics dogs, and we did see that. I think we talked about it a while ago. In Trump Mar-a-Lago, there is robotic security dogs that are walking around on the property.
Yeah, I'm sure that Chinese company absolutely did not steal the intellectual property from Boston Dynamics to create that robot. But I mean, it's interesting what you say about China and how, they're not going to hold back. That is true across the board, isn't it? And things like gene editing and stuff, like really controversial areas of inquiry, let's say, areas of science. And that's what makes China so interesting as like a rival, because they don't have the same kind of moral or ethical barriers to experimentation. So it puts us in a really difficult position where we have to say either we sacrifice our ethical code that's derived from 2,000 years of Christianity or whatever, or we are defeated basically by a superior world power. So it's a terrible position to be in, really, isn't it?
You could look to corporate greed that kind of drove Chinese advancement, because many of the corporations from North America, mostly America, went to China for cheap labor, and they welcomed them. And then if you look at it, many of the technology they went there to build, like if you look at even the iPhone went there to build, with Foxconn went there to build the iPhone, and then all of a sudden, companies like Huawei are sprouted up. Tesla went there to build like EVs and all. There's like 100 EV producers in China. And some of them are absolutely amazing in some of the technology they're delivering. Like they're now making 50% of the cars worldwide are being made in China, and
Yeah.
they have the capacity to make all the vehicles manufacturing in the world, and they're doing it cheaper, better, and faster. And it's like really putting the legacy or auto manufacturers on notice, and many of them are shutting down plants in China because there's a lot of joint ventures. Again, they brought the legacy automakers, the Ford, the GMs, and that, the Volkswagens, Porsches, and that to China, and they had to partner with China to build these factories. And now, they got all the technology from them, and then they're now on their own.
Yeah, well, it's irresistible in a way, isn't it? It's like these two entities exist in different countries. You've got the innovation, the technological advancement, like you basically got the brain power in the United States, but then in China you have the most complex, sophisticated, efficient industrial machine the world's ever seen that can like produce anything at pretty low prices very quickly, and very sort of very effectively. Like it all works. And the Americans, I think, or the American innovators and the business people that sponsor them could not resist, because it was basically they had theory, the Chinese had praxis, and they couldn't resist each other, could they? Because it was these two obvious like forces that needed to be together to do anything. But that's kind of the story of the rest of this century, is it seems to me anyways, that America now is trying to say, no, we want to break up this relationship and we want to do it in America. But anybody that knows anything about that southern Chinese, sort of like southeastern Chinese industrial complex, knows that that is very, very difficult to rival. I mean, it's like it's gigantic, isn't it? And it took decades to create that, and it's so hard to challenge.
Yeah, there's a city, I think, Sichuan, I think it's pronounced. It was basically a village like 30, 40 years ago. And it's one of the most modern cities in the world. And, they did that. Whereas, like, I don't know of anything where, like in Canada, where we've gone from like, like a village to like a massive city that's a modern city in a short period of time.
Yeah, I don't, it's hard to find comparisons. I mean, even Shanghai, which was traditionally the most kind of Europeanized, the most modern city in China before the recent modernization. Even Shanghai, when you look at like before and after pictures, it's like astonishing how much that's changed.
Yeah.
It's everywhere in China uh, pretty much has changed dramatically. Even in the far west of China, where it's like pretty it's like desert really. Even there, it's like changed so much and modernized such a to such an extraordinary degree.
And then the next one, these two used to be at each other all the time, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. Elon Musk congratulating Jeff Bezos this morning for their launch of a Blue Origin rocket into outer space, their first one. And then we've got a little clip to play of the Blue Origin rocket. Jeff Bezos also has a competitor to Starlink. They have, when I was at CES, I toured the Amazon booth. It wasn't a booth, it was a whole big room. And they do have satellite technologies similar to Starlink. They're a little bit behind that, but they are working on it as well. So they are a competitor to Starlink and SpaceX. This is, and it seems like the two are on talking terms, and both have been to Mar-a-Lago. Well, Elon's been there a lot, but they seem to
Well,
have found some
there's been
common
an
ground.
attempt there's been an attempt in the press to try and make it seem like Bezos is like gunning for SpaceX and he's gunning for Musk, and like Musk's days might be numbered kind of thing. But it really does seem like Musk wants this to happen, and
Yeah.
he's sort of said that. Well, he's actually said that explicitly, hasn't he? He said if it's another company that gets to Mars first or whatever, then
Yeah.
so be it. Like, what matters is that we get to Mars. That's the priority.
He has a mission, and his mission is occupy Mars. And a lot of the stuff that he says, even Tesla, is to get the funding, like to raise the cash to get to Mars. And even his EV thing, he wants other EV manufacturers to be successful because he believes more EVs on the road makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, he is saying that as the number one EV producer in the world, and also the number one, or the is it still? Yeah, it's still the most highly valued, isn't it, for the EV producers? And then also he has like effectively a kind of monopoly in the reusable rocket market. So maybe his tune would change if, let's say, Bezos supplanted him. But I don't know. It's undeniable that he, or I think it is anyway, that he really believes this. He's so enthusiastic about it.
They are being civil with each other, which is unusual because they're usually at each other. So that's a good sign. Tesla,
Yeah, the oligarchy are friends with each other.
Tesla reportedly going to enter the Saudi Arabian market, the capital of oil and gas in the world. Going to get some electric Teslas. 40% of Saudi customers are considering buying an EV within the next 3 years. So big untapped luxury market. I imagine China is going to do really well in Saudi Arabia because they're working together as well. And the EVs in China are very luxurious and opulent, whereas Teslas are fairly, I would say, minimalist and vanilla compared to some of the stuff that's coming out of China.
Well, the Saudis are trying to, they're trying to oversee a revolution, aren't they? MBS, as he's called, the Crown Prince. He's trying to position the country to still be wealthy and to survive when oil runs out or when people stop using oil.
They hold a lot of conferences. Pierre Diamandis has been there. He's the one that spoke for us at Level Up in 2024 here. And he's been there lots hosting conferences on artificial intelligence. So they're definitely looking to invest that money into the future. You can see a lot of stuff. You see some of the stuff that's being built in Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Dubai. I mean, just massive amounts of change that have happened there in the past 40 years. And in the EV world, the Volkswagen ID Buzz has been named the 2025 North American Utility Vehicle of the Year. And we've got a little clip here to play of the Volkswagen likes to kind of like go back to their history. Like, this looks like the old VW van or whatever it was called. Very like the Bug is one of their things, right? And then this thing is very reminiscent of the old Volkswagen van, right?
They're trying to inaugurate another summer of love, aren't they?
I guess. So there you go. You can get yourself
resurrect the Beatles.
the VW ID Buzz coming to a place. We got our meme. You found this meme, or you created this meme, because there was that story about Justin Trudeau with the ski hill there, and that they said that he was welcomed there. And then you got the signage in the background that we love the carbon tax. There you go.
Well, it's funny because when he first became prime minister, seems like there's actually, you didn't have to make them in AI, did you? They actually did happen. People actually flocked to him and wanted photographs with him. There
were many countries that said, "Why can't we have a leader like Justin Trudeau in the early days?" And they did whole stories just based on his socks, and that turned out to be a negative later when they started calling him sock boy and that. But in the beginning, there's pictures of him like I don't know, like with his shirt off and stuff like that. He was definitely idolized by many, and definitely has charisma. And but a lot of people say now lacking substance.
Yeah, well, it just goes to show that in politics, every love affair has an expiry date, and I would say his expiry date probably was about 5 years ago, something like that. Yeah. But he's hung on way past that date, and hence you have all this antagonism and all this, passionate, I would say, hatred almost of him personally.
And I think Stephen Harper suffered that same fate, though, when that election when Justin Trudeau got in the first time. I think a lot of the votes were anti-Harper as opposed to pro-Trudeau in the beginning. Because a lot of people thought that Stephen Harper was very arrogant.
Yeah, and I think you have to look at it in the context of America as well, as is often the case with anything that happens in Canada, because they in America were quite self-satisfied with the election of Barack Obama and the kind of liberal lefty turn that that country had taken. And that was happening elsewhere in Europe as well. And I think Canada wanted
Yeah.
wanted their own Obama, really, didn't they? They wanted someone kind of cool and young who was going to be really liberal and make a lot of changes that were deemed to be long overdue, like legalizing cannabis and stuff like that. And he was the guy, wasn't he?
And yeah, a friend from your a knight from your jolly old England there has come out and said that was one of the worst mistakes that Canada's ever made, legalizing weed. That was Sir Elton
Yeah,
John that came out with that statement.
yeah, which is a bit odd that the singer of Rocket Man would say that, but
Yeah, he.
no, I think a lot of the data and a lot of the studies now, we know so much more about cannabis now than we did when that was legalized and when those arguments for legalization were put forth, mostly in the 20th century. We know loads more now. We know about the kind of damage that it does to your brain and how it can change your personality and induce psychosis and all kinds of things. So, I mean, it's a different conversation now, I think.
We,
Maybe Elton has been reading the studies.
hey, we could probably call if we were to do an interview with Elton John. And we'd be more than willing to do it if he'd be willing to do it with us. We would call him an expert because he was quite the user as well, right? So he would be labeled as an expert in the drug usage.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, he was very much a member of that kind of 60s, 70s
Uh,
blowout, wasn't he? So yeah, he would know all about it.
and he has been knighted, so he definitely fits a lot of the things. He has a voice. He's created some of the greatest songs. I mean, I'm a big fan of Elton John's work. He's done some great stuff for sure.
Yeah, especially as kind of like country style albums. They're very good, I think.
I would think that one of the biggest contributions that England has made to the world is its music and arts. I mean, they've done so well in that regard. So you think of the Beatles and Elton John and Rolling Stones, some of the most iconic brands ever.
Yeah, well, I would say the 20th century was kind of like the century of music in many ways, and I would say the British dominated popular music, and then the 19th century was the era of novels, and I would argue, maybe controversially, that the British also dominated that. So, but sadly, the 21st century it seems to be like cinema and TV, and that's absolutely dominated by the US, isn't it? So
I
the
think
Americans look like they're going to win this one.
the French would argue with you on the literature side, but hey, and then the art side too. But um, we got some good news for you. The month-long Okanagan Hot Chocolate Festival kicks off here this Friday. Month long, and there's some calories for you right there. Look at that. That's a meal right there, or a dessert, or both.
Think that's into the full figures for calories there?
But I mean, does it look tempting? Absolutely. Like I mean, some of those creations, there's probably enough calories in the one on the far right there for the week.
The one in the middle there with the nice little flowers, little petals.
Yeah,
That one's maybe a bit healthier.
that's not enough chocolate for me on that one. I do like the one on the far left and the one on the far right more, so I'm not really into eating the flowers, but it does look pretty. That's good for the flat lay. Christia Freeland could have used that in her flat lay there with the phones and put that one out there. That would have been probably added a little more color to her vibe. But
Then she would have been accused of being an elitist, though, wouldn't she, with her expensive drink?
well, the four cell phones don't say that.
Yeah.
I can remember a time when I worked at a mine site that I had three cell phones, and I thought I was ridiculous. But you have to wonder, like, you can't be on more than one at a time. So why do you have four? I guess is the question. Are they three burner phones and one regular phone, or what's the deal with all the phones?
Maybe she has like a phone for the Liberal caucus, a phone for the finance department, or something. I don't know. Yeah, I've often wondered how they sort of manage their phones and how they actually do it. Like Trump, for example, how many phones does he have? I mean, I know he's kind of like recites his tweets, doesn't he? And then somebody listens to them and writes it
Yeah,
down.
he has
That
got
was
a
in a
team.
video.
He's got a team that works on his tweets, I think, because I remember watching one of the videos of him watching the Kamala Harris speech, and they're he's shouting out orders, and people are tweeting and doing different things, I think, on his account. Whereas Elon Musk, I think, is authentic, and everything that comes from him comes straight out of his phone, according to him, anyway. So.
Well, hasn't he recently been exposed as having hired someone to play a game for him or something like that, to get him up the rankings in a computer game?
I missed that, but I wouldn't put it past him. But there you go.
I don't know if it's actually true. It's an accusation, but it's because he's one of the top ranked players on some really popular video game, isn't he?
So coming to the show, we'll end with that. We're going to have Ian's face. It's going to come on, I think, hopefully by next week, sometime mid next week. And then we're also going to be able to put up another monitor here so we can see your comments and feedback as we're talking through the show, so that we can even converse with some of that stuff. So more and more changes coming to the show. And for the really big show, we just got to keep adding stuff to the show. And again, we love your comments, whether they're positive or negative. If you want to take the time and make a comment, we appreciate it. And we can only get better through constructive criticism, for sure. But we ask you to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, our X channel. We have a daily newsletter that goes out 365 days a year before 7 a.m. And we also have, we're on X and we're on TikTok. And hopefully soon we'll be on Facebook and Instagram again.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Anyway, we look forward to some of the announcements that are coming out and see who's going to run for this Liberal leadership. And how are you doing with your $350,000? Are you ready to run?
It's a little bit hard because the rules specify that you can only raise, I think, $1,700 from any one person. So my billionaire backers can't give me all the money, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to buy a few more phones and ring around, see what I can get.
Obviously, it's the dinners, and then who gets all the money, I guess, is another question. Like the 350 just goes into the Liberal pot, I guess. And so if they get more contenders in there, that's more money for the Liberal pot. And then when it comes election time, they spend out of that pot, but everybody else seems to feed the pot.
Yeah, the pot must be fed.
There you go. So the pot bellies. There you go. That said, we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna